Assalamu alaikum, good evening. Welcome to the first inaugural posting of our webinar of the 2020 revision series. We're just going to wait for a few more participants to join us. So we'll begin in approximately 2 minutes, inshallah. Thanks so much and looking forward to join in this event with each of you. Islam. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Peace and blessings be with each and every one of you. My name is Gerald Hankerson. I serve as the outreach coordinator at the Council on American Islamic Relations, Chicago office at Illinois chapter, known locally as CARE Chicago. And I'm happy to welcome each and every one of you, both in Zoom as well as Facebook Live, to the inaugural webinar for the 2020 revision series. This is a series that will explore the crossroads of both the pandemics of racism and COVID-19 and what it means for us to really push through with social justice and civil rights efforts. The first of many, we hope, God willing, to explore all the various aspects of making sure that we can stay committed to advocacy and build solidarity through these unprecedented times. We would definitely have an agenda with three of some wonderful panelists of the community that's in the work in various fields. But most importantly, we want to also make sure that with each webinar, we're able to really discover ways that we could be involved, proactive efforts, and things that could sustain us and build us to be stronger. With that, one of the things we just want to talk about very briefly, that is the wonderful works with our long-standing partners in the Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition. It's also co-sponsoring this event. I want to bring in one of my colleagues, Walid Sakari, who will explain the importance of the ongoing census work. Walid?
Thank you, Brother Gerald. Assalamu alaikum, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Walid, and I'm just here to do a quick reminder for a lot of people who may have not filled out the 2020 census already. A lot of us have been home for a long time or had our activity disrupted. So it's just a reminder that the easiest way to take the census, if you haven't done it, is to visit my2020census.gov. So as you may or may not know, the census is the population count, which serves as the basis for any data-driven decision that affects our states, our counties, our cities, our communities. It affects how much funding we get for, schools or infrastructure or libraries, or which bus routes or how many trains go which way. And it affects how they draw our electoral districts. So for the next 10 years, any of these decisions is going to be rooted in the data we get. And Illinois has one of the most diverse and populations in the country, but it also makes it hard to count. So don't wait for the Census Bureau to come and bother you and knock on your door to get yourself counted. Visit my2020census.gov, and it takes about 10 minutes. It's important, it's easy, and your data is secure. So yeah. Thank you, Brother Gerald.
No problem. Thank you, Waleed. For now, just to have a brief understanding of what this event is all about. For this particular event, we want to really set the tone. The plan is for this to be a monthly series. And so why not, for the very beginning, to kick off with really establishing how the COVID-19 pandemic converged with anti-Blackness and racism overall. So we'll have the introductions and some insights from our three panelists. And then, of course, we'll go into the panel discussion with several questions to really explore the convergence of those two pandemics and where we're at in terms of really going towards a new normal, which we're all still trying to figure out what that means. Of course, we'll have a Q&A. We hope to also invite you, our participants, to really engage in discussion with us. Do note that as of now, of course, your audio should be muted, but once it comes to the Q&A, we invite you to pose questions in the chat section. And definitely, of course, if you join us through Facebook Live, also feel free to comment there as well. Again, my colleagues, Waleed, as well as Chris Nevares Asdar, will be helping out in coordinating the Q&A public forum. We'll have one more important announcement towards the end, so please stay tuned to that. In the event that if the discussion is lively, we may go over time to 7:30 for those who are willing to join us and stick around. But by all means, we'd like to commence now with introducing our wonderful panelists. Can we have the next slide? So starting with, sorry, go back, my apologies, yeah. There we go. So starting with Dr. Saima Asfar, who is with ICNA Relief. She is a longtime resident of Chicago, moving here in 1998, and has multiple nonprofits that she worked with over her years, which amplifies her experience right now since the COVID-19 pandemic. She is with the Midwest region of the ICNA Relief Organization, which has served over 17,000 individuals with services including hunger prevention, emergency financial assistance, health screenings, and so much more. And nationally, ICNA Relief has served over 550,000 individuals since the pandemic broke. So thank you, Saima, thank you so much for joining. We next have Brother Khalil Rashid, who's a longtime Chicago native as well. He's the graduate fellow at Northeastern Illinois University here in Chicago, where he serves as assistant professor in the Department of Political Science, as well as a researcher. His areas of interest include international relations, global studies, urban politics, and development. And he's been doing a lot of community activism here locally. So thank you, Brother Khalil Rashid. Last but not least, we have Brother Aaron Jason Siebert-Liera, who is the immigrant rights attorney with the ACLU of Illinois, a longtime civil rights attorney with over 15 years of experience through litigation, advocacy, legislation, and education as a lawyer, organizer, activist, teacher, and professor. He too also worked with a litany of well-known and very important advocacy organizations here in Chicagoland as well. So with that, let's start with Dr. Saima to share a little bit more about herself. Again, some insights on the topic. Are we really all in? How are we fighting against COVID-19 and dismantling anti-Blackness? Dr. Saima.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah, everyone. Thank you so much, Brother Gerald and Civic Coalition, Care Chicago, and everyone to give me opportunity to talk here. I'm always in awe of our youth and young people like you who are leading the conversation. Thank you. ICNA Relief here, we are working actually, and we are on the grounds and meeting with the families, peoples, in very densely populated areas where the need is huge. Since this COVID started, even before that, way before that, we are working since 2005. ICNA Relief is on the grounds, and the situation is not good. And pandemic actually, those who are hungry, they become more hungry. Those who are about to become homeless, they are homeless now. Those who had very daily wages, they don't have any jobs. So the situation is not good, and we are trying our best. And I really appreciate you inviting me, and I would love to discuss more further.
Jazakallah khair. Appreciate that, Dr. Saima. Brother Khalil.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Sorry about that. I had to unmute. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasul Kareem wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man. Jazakallah khair for having me as well as a part of this beautiful panel. Thank you to CARE and the Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition and all those involved with putting this together. Much needed work in an uncertain time. As far as my work goes, as Gerald mentioned, I am a graduate fellow at Northeastern Illinois University in the Political Science Department, studying global affairs, and now actually because of this whole epidemic, may pivot some of my studies related to political science, specifically in the categories of urban politics and urban development, which was in the plan. But as we see, I come here to share my experiences and hopefully gain some insight. And, thank you for creating this panel to create a dialogue, much needed dialogue, again, in these uncertain times. Just like Dr. Simon and the rest of the panelists, I'm here to discuss, it's a reciprocal process, growing and learning, new things every day related to the current times that we're in. And I also would like to lastly mention before, we pass it on, being here as a Muslim and offering, some of what Islam has to offer to those, as we see out in the world, who are struggling for answers, struggling for solutions, in understanding that systemic change is needed to provide that. So hopefully, inshallah, this will be a good, starting point to create that wave that's needed. Jazakallah khair.
Wa alaikum jazakallah khair to you too, akhi. Last but not least, Brother Aaron.
Alaikum. It always reminds me of thinking that after everything passes and we're all going to be used to now having these memes, everything coming out, just having to say, so-and-so, you're muted. And the person says, oh, I'm sorry, I was muted. Because it's become the new norm that we have to make sure, okay, we got to actually physically unmute ourselves to even speak. Thank you for the introduction and for the ability to be on this panel. I think the most important thing that can come out of panels like this and moving forward is that it actually leads towards change. That we aren't getting this, a few months where people feel activated and feel like they should get out, and then it just dies out. Because what we'd seen before all this happened was we had gotten to this point where people were just kind of doing like the click activism. Let me post something, see how many likes I can get, and wait, you want me to go out on the street? You want me to actually go protest? I got other things to do. I don't want to get out there. And we're actually seeing this start to happen again, which we haven't seen in decades. People actually getting out in the streets and wanting to, needing to realize that that's what leads to change. When we saw what started to happen and all the people getting out in the streets, and then we see, obviously it hasn't been enough change yet, but we start to see how much has actually changed in a short amount of time, just because that pressure of people in the street saying, no, we won't take this anymore, is so much more important than anything else that anybody can do, because it shows we've got a collective voice that we're using. So that really, for me, is the most important thing that can come out of this. And moving forward, any types of panels and discussions that we have amongst ourselves, families, friends, everybody, we should be using this time to talk with people who we could consider enemies and realize, where do we have commonality? Where do we have common ground?
Jazakallah khair. Appreciate you, Brother Aaron. And so just before we start the official panel, just want to share again the premise of this entire webinar series and this particular event tonight. So myself, along with brothers Waleed and Chris, again, both of those brothers work with the Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition, and CARE Chicago has worked alongside many civic engagement efforts, including the aforementioned Sisters 2020 efforts, which has now been extended to October in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. And obviously everyone has been rocked by this. This is something that for us in our own individual ways, as well as professionally, it's been a challenge to see how we can really stay committed and really making sure that our civil rights work is still impacting every single community member. But it became even more of a different outcry once we started to see that different lives were impacted much more gravely to the point where it's even fatally. And especially when it started to really reveal what has already been known about the injustices that exist in our community. When you're talking about non-access to healthcare, to something what should be as important as measuring one's own level of pain and being able to have the understandings of food and shelter. Those things are all ever necessary, but it only seems for so many and so few. There's been so many perspectives and analyses shared over the weeks, but this particular week, something really hit me in preparation for this event. Earlier this week, it was discussion of the European Union creating its own possible travel ban against the United States, because our country, unfortunately, is still seeing now new record numbers, high levels of confirmed positive cases of COVID-19. And where one news analyst was saying that our bodies are now being seen as a threat. So this is not any possible, oh, because I have this particular salary or job or this stature in society, every American will be labeled as a threat when not being allowed into Europe. But at the same time, this is not only the individuals that have been seen as a threat, practically for the entire existence in this country, people of color, especially those who identify as Black, have been seen as threats to the very existence of this country, whether it's through the meritocracy of capitalism to the very idea of love, respect, nurturance, and acceptance. And so with this series, what we want to explore is, while we're trying to envision whatever a new normal is going to be, we need to really be consistent in making sure that we're not making even more dire collection of the haves and have-nots. And that's what's being played out right now. And so with this particular event tonight, again, really want to set the tone for what we hope to each month really explore what is going on within our society, but how we could be agents of change through the auspices of tradition and civil rights and social justice work. And so with that, let's commence with this panel discussion with our very first question. So in your professional roles and personal lives, how and where do you see both COVID-19 and racism intersect? And do you see the people around you understanding how these two pandemics relate? Explain. And we can start off with Dr. Salma just to kick it off.
Ladies first, huh?
You ladies first.
Inshallah.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So, people are suffering. They are getting very, very, very frustrated. They are understanding what is happening. The areas where, if we just talk about Chicago, we are working in many different areas. You can say more than 20 areas where we are working in the side of Chicago, from Aurora, Glendale Heights. We have two main offices. One is in Glendale Heights, the other one is in Rogers Park. And Rogers Park, West Rogers Park is the highly infected area. It was the highly infected in the Illinois. The highest COVID-19 cases were there. And our case workers, volunteers, we were there. We were trying to provide food to, community members. What we used to do, we used to have 500 families, which we used to support before COVID with the food, monthly food boxes and weekly groceries. As soon as this COVID hit, this pandemic started and we were in lockdown, we received 10 times more calls. Can you imagine? Like 5,000 calls we received, and we had to provide food without, because of the lockdown, volunteers were not there. Because of the lockdown, access to food was really, really hard. And we were trying to establish some sort of system with our community members to provide food to those those people who were being calling us constantly, and we didn't want them to come out from their houses. And those who had enough before the situation, they still had enough. Those they didn't had enough food. They were completely out of very basic necessities. So there is frustration, there is anger. We are actually going to different parts of the cities, like 48th Street, 47th Street, 95th Street, Stony Island, Sheridan Avenue. There are many, Roosevelt Road, many avenues where there are food deserts. There are fresh produce is not even available. So this is just the food. Then we had the situation with the health. There were many families who were out of, they didn't have, access to the health insurance to begin with. And with COVID-19, they didn't know what to do. They were very scared that as soon as they are going to say that they are affected by it, they'll put into quarantine, and then they will not be able to work. So we started telehealth line with Pakistani Physicians Society, and which was allowing everybody to call and just get the enough information through professionals, through doctors were on the line. We had social workers, and people were calling from all sorts of community members. So we are trying our best. And then on top of that, the situation was so bad. We had situations with mental health issues. People were stressed out, depressed, anxiety, anger. How you are going to provide all those services. And the people are understanding the situation is sad. They are feeling horrible. They're feeling bad. They're feeling let down. And we really need to come up with a solution where we can fill this gap. If there are funds available, how they're going to reach to these community members and these families who are suffering. This is my say.
MashaAllah. Khalil?
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So just going off of what Dr. Simon is experiencing, because I know we'll get into it a little bit later with some of the later questions. Being on the ground is very imperative, and doing the footwork. But unfortunately, during these times, a lot of that is, marginalized. But in terms of the overall theme of tonight's discussion, and actually the series moving forward, the question revolves a couple of different dynamics that, I think, especially early on, we should clarify. And putting the COVID-19 and the outbreak of racism and the intersectionality of it is actually very, very creative. But understanding it is important, and understanding, some of the conceptual things fundamentally, which, probably won't have enough time to tonight. I'm, trying to stray away from teaching the class. But understanding racism as a pandemic, we got to understand that a pandemic has a couple of different definitions, and so does racism, which is very entrenched within American society and the American fabric. Obviously, nobody knows that more than, a lot of us who are minorities in this country. But understanding it as a pandemic, as an adjective, a pandemic is a disease over, a particular land or a particular country, and over, the world. Understanding a pandemic as a noun, we see it as an outbreak. It's defined as an outbreak. So we see with the COVID-19 and all the systemic racist problems that exist, clashing, which, if you put yourselves in the shoes of the minority, particularly African Americans, you will see that, racism, this isn't a sudden outbreak. This is something that has defined this country. And, me being, a political scientist studying global, affairs, I like to, make certain connections, but, also the pandemic, COVID-19 and racism, understanding it as a disease. Now, we as Muslims, we understand that the loss of Panama Valley talks about many diseases and ills that exist within the individual, society, country, so forth and so forth. So putting, these things in, its correct conceptual framework is important in order for us to make systemic change, which I believe Aaron, talked about in his introduction. Dr. Simon led it to, in her previous comments. Looking at it, systemically, creating a systemic change, and then, with the little things that we're doing, such as what we're doing tonight, moving forward. And I'll leave it, at that, first and foremost. And there are other things that I know that we can touch on with some of the later questions, but I just want to keep it concise.
Shukran. Brother Honorable.
Yeah, most definitely. You have a sickness. It's a sickness that this country, I think for too long, people like to think 1968, this culmination of the 60s of all these movements and the civil rights struggles. And for far too long, I think the mentality was, well, we went through that struggle already. Racism was eradicated. We don't have racism anymore. And then people try to just point to Trump and say, well, look, he's the problem. He's not the problem. The problem has always been there. These communities that we look at that get into the media now because, how dare they do this and how can they be so angry? Well, that's because since the 60s when these uprisings were happening and people were speaking out, nothing has changed. These communities, you still have Black and brown communities where someone wants to open up a business, there still are no banks that are going to say, hey, we're going to give you a loan. Where's that collateral that they have? They don't have that history of family income that they can go on and say, well, here's some collateral. I want to get this business loan. What this has done for me is I'll look at it from the perspective of essential workers. We talk about essential workers. We talk about people that now we have a president and other people in this country who are going to label people who work in the fields as essential workers, where just a few months ago, before all this happened, they were still trying to deport and get rid of everybody here who was here without any documentation and get rid of a lot of these people are the people who work in the fields, whether they come from Mexico, whether they come from Central America, whether they come from the Philippines. We have people from all over the world who are working in these fields who are somehow now essential workers because we need to eat. And yet we still have plenty of food. I talked with my son's friend's dad, and he was telling me about talking with his family back in Nigeria and how his friend had to give his kids Benadryl or some sort of medicine so they would fall asleep at night because she said, I don't have enough food for them to eat dinner. And he looked at me and was like, you guys are so spoiled in this country. We're still, we're on lockdown, yet we still have Wi-Fi, we still have cable, we still have food services deliver us food. But then when we see like with ICNA Relief and other groups that do this, there's plenty of people that need food and don't have access to this food. So there's this racism still that occurs when we look at who gets labeled essential workers, because then we have curfews that then get put in different cities. And we have people that are working these essential worker positions. And how do they get to work? Mass transit. And if that is not available to them, or if they have to still take it and there's this pandemic happening, they're exposing themselves now to getting exposed to COVID-19 for what? 10, 12, 15, if they're lucky, dollars an hour. Is this going to stay? I don't know. We had the 1950s where someone who was making minimum wage or could work in a grocery store could actually afford to take care of a family. That's not even the case. You could probably, I don't even know what the numbers would say, but I know you probably work 2 full-time jobs at minimum wage and you're still not going to be able to provide for a family. So what this has done is it's exposed a lot of the inequities that were already there and have always been there, and people try to pretend like they were gone. And fortunately, We have enough people who've got their foot on the pedal who are not letting up, saying, no, we need to talk about this. We need to address this now. It's been too long.
MashaAllah, there's a lot of points that you guys covered, and we'll definitely explore much more deeply. And I think that's a nice setup for question number 2, because each of you posed certain challenges that has always been present, but even more magnified and even more grossly expanded, right? So what new challenges have you experienced in terms of working in your respective fields? And you represent a great deal of them. So, here listed social work, politics, and community activism, public health, immigration advocacy, and how has these 2 pandemics really impact that? Let's start back with Brother Aaron, since he was kind of on a roll there.
Okay, jeez. Again, I don't know if a lot of these are new challenges. These are things that have existed, that they may be new challenges in the eyes of people who wanted to pretend like they weren't there. When we talked for a long time about the fact that, and I don't want to take from what other people might say, but I can just say quickly, like if we look at something like hunger, people look at other countries where there's people who are starving. We have numbers here in this country we've had for a long time of plenty of people who are starving. Food deserts that before this happened have now been made so much worse because so a lot of these businesses are now closed, and that's again when we look at the racism where this intersection lies. And we talked about this yesterday on our planning call. We look at a lot of Muslim-owned businesses in these communities. And the interesting thing that I heard from a friend of mine when we were talking about what was happening after what was happening in some of the neighborhoods on the south and west side was that he was saying, this was really interesting to me, that the businesses that people knew were good and were people knew were in the community to help people, they were untouched. People knew this person's not here taking advantage of people. They're here. It's a legitimate business. But if you had businesses where someone has a corner store selling liquor and they don't care who they sell to, 15-year-old comes in, they don't care. They're not asking for IDs. They're selling drugs sometimes out the back. Who knows what's going on? People know what's happening. People know that you're not here for our best interests. You're here just to make money. These things have existed. But to say as far as the challenges, that's one of the things I've seen with the immigration work that I've been doing. We're trying to get people released from immigration detention who are at risk for COVID-19. Again, you see a lot of people who are from the undocumented community, who are undocumented, who are here, who have been working, but if they happen to work in healthcare or a field worker or maybe a meat packing plant, they might have the luxury in the eyes of some of being labeled as a essential worker, but they have not stopped picking people up. They have not stopped. They only waited for countries to open it back up before they started to deport people again. They're still doing it. I was on a call with a detainee, client of mine just an hour ago. He's being sent back tomorrow morning. So this stuff has continued. It's just some people are picking and choosing who is essential, who we don't need, but that's always happened. We had a Bracero program that existed for 20 years where this country was able to say, hey, we need these field workers to come in so we can pay them less and then they work in the fields, but they can only stay for a certain amount of time. But I don't want to, again, like Brother Khalil said, I don't want to turn it into a lesson because I could probably go on for another half an hour. So I'll pass it on.
SubhanAllah, but that's still good to highlight that there's this continuum that we need to continuously reinforce on how these all are interconnected and very problematic. Dr. Saima, you were also talking about food deserts, so would you like to continue in that?
Yes, actually, it really took a toll on all of us, on our team, the staff, the volunteers. Some of us worked 15 to 18 hours. It was very, very difficult time. It was I'm talking about the COVID-19 pandemic. I just mentioned before too, that the number of cases were increased, domestic violence increased in the community members. And we have a transitional housing for women and children, and all the local shelters were closed because of this pandemic. And we were receiving calls. We used to receive calls, 1 to 2 calls every week, from our sisters who've been victim of domestic abuse. And now since the COVID started, I personally was receiving 1 to 2 calls daily. Can you imagine that? I was receiving these calls and there was no place who could take these ladies in. So we had to have, put them in the hotels or some other places. It was crazy. It was really difficult situation, but I don't want to only talk about challenges. I remember in the beginning of this COVID-19, I was like, I didn't know what to do because our phone line was ringing continuously for the food and other needs. And our community stood up, they stepped up, mashallah, local masajid, Islamic Center of Wheaton, I really would like to mention, they opened their doors for us to use the masjid. Nobody else could do that. They gave us the keys that you can pack food boxes as much as you can. And then CIOGC with their Zakat Chicago, is Darussalam, mashallah, Darussalam Mufti Azim called me and he said, like, I'm raising funds for the food. And he just quietly, he came at the office and he dropped the check. So our own community, Islamic Center of Naperville, our Mecca Center. So Muslims stood up, we raised zakat, we really provided, food to almost 14,000 individuals or more. It was really crazy work. And then because most of our work, if you're talking about challenges, most of ICNA relief work is depending on volunteers. And without volunteers, we are unable to do that. 80 to 90% work is done by volunteers. So we had nobody coming. And then we start making telephone calls. We made task force and different things. And mashallah, youth, they joined us. They start pouring in. We had to make a proper shift so we can keep them under 10 in one time. And that was very, very difficult. Then in Rogers Park, where these cases were so high, we didn't want community members to come and walk to our food pantry to receive the food. We thought as if we ask them to come, it will just make it worse. So we plan to do the home deliveries. We start doing doorstep delivery. And you can imagine how hard it is, doing home deliveries to 1,000+ families' homes with very, very few volunteers. It was very tough. I really want to write a book on these challenges. Want to do a proper program on that because I have a long list of that. And really, it opened up so many beautiful doors, many, mashallah, beautiful souls. They start volunteering, they start, coming to donate funds, alhamdulillah. They were coming and asking how you are doing. So it was a challenge, but at the same time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless a lot of blessings through those tough times. Inna ma'al usri yusra, So there is always something positive. There were even some times when we used to say, oh, I need, 100 rice bags. And subhanAllah, any donor they call and they say exactly same amount of rice bags. Okay, we will donate this much. So it was, alhamdulillah, it was subhanAllah, amazing work, but very, very challenging.
I'm glad you pointed to out of the challenges there can very well much be solutions and people standing up with community. I think that's always something that's been touted, not only within the Muslim community, but of course throughout this country and nation. And so that is a nice little segue for you, Brother Khalil, because I know you traverse the entire region, going back and forth, being involved in a lot of work. So the course speak to the professional, but again, I would love to hear on a personal level what that means for you with this question.
Yeah. So in terms of challenges, I'm actually in transition professionally. I wasn't involved in social work and social services for a while, so I can attest to what the other two panelists are experiencing. But I'm transitioning from that field more into academics and into research because I believe that education is still one of the most important tools that we can have individually and collectively in terms of understanding, a lot of these societal problems, political problems, and, all of these barriers that are up. So in terms of, social services and social work, I'm still in touch with, some of the agencies I used to work for, particularly, Department of Children and Family Services, a few mental health agencies where I did residential counseling, and obviously those who receive those services are at the bottom of societal's totem pole, so they always get the short end of the stick, even related to within the past maybe 10 years or so, the budget deficit in the state of Illinois, which cut a lot of services out. So a lot of places are struggling, a lot of public, health agencies are struggling, essential, services, which, I know we'll talk about later on. Just a lot of services are, have been struggling for the past decade or so. And so what this pandemic has done was obviously increase, those problems. So I'm transitioning now into education and research. Particularly my fellowship is, sponsored by the Illinois State Legislature to increase the number of minority professors within public education here in Illinois. And we also know that public education across the board, particularly in higher education, but education from elementary to high school to higher ed has also suffered from, budget deficits and so forth. And so, relating back to COVID-19 pandemic, obviously we know that, it hit dead in the middle of, spring semester and early on into the school year for 2020. And obviously a lot of, students and a lot of professors and faculty have had to have pretty much their profession just, cut off from beneath their feet, which obviously causes a problem both professionally and, as well as providing the service of education to, the students. Time is yet to tell what's going to happen, but, I'm particularly worried about my own kids who, are young but are in schools, and that's one of the worst things that could happen, as a student, is to have, a cutoff. I even, argue against things like summer break. I, think it's too long because the mind goes idle, and, there'll be, academic setbacks, obviously, for anyone who, is studying, but particularly related to, the challenges that are there. Obviously, we're still in the midst of some of these turbulent challenges and these times. But like Dr. Simon, alluded to, there are also benefits, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us, blessings through, these hardships and challenges. And, in terms of the da'wah and Islamic work, we really see Muslims, stepping up individually and collectively. A lot of creative waves are happening, throughout this pandemic. And so I'll leave it at that for now. But definitely, it is a challenge, and, maybe, this is one of the things as a Muslim, that could bring us back to providing Islam as a solution.
That for me, as and already sort of the discussions already had, we keep hitting that term essential, and that has been really one of the first revelations that happened with the COVID-19 pandemic, in terms of really underscoring like when and where in our priorities that we deem people to be important, necessary, valued, but as Aaron pointed out, to what extent, right? So with question 3, and this, for our participants viewing, this is one that's a bit contentious. So if we can have question 3 up. All right, thanks, brothers. So there's been much discussion about what is essential, especially when we prioritizing our public health against having like a strong economy. And so that's only one of many different dichotomies that's continuously being measured out. So what have we gotten right and what we got wrong within our society by distinguishing like who's essential, whether we're talking about people, where we're talking about our needs, where we're talking about different jobs and roles we play in, and ideals and aspirations that we define within the country. And there's a few examples here. Of course, it's already been alluded to, the idea of essential workers within working in farms, or of course, in the meatpacking plants across the country, or even once we start to look at the sports arena, right? There was some particular controversies about, oh no, we're not going to have the NBA, or oh no, we may not necessarily be, having a baseball season, which now supposedly is. But also think about too how in some ways these two pandemics are and have been politicized. So quick example is seeing the vitality, right, of citizens and residents exercising First Amendment rights. When it's about the quarantine, no one's attacked, right? You see people with, magazine guns and all these others standing in front of state houses, but you also see tear gas and beating by police when we're talking about anti-racism protests. So Khalil, you were starting to kind of go in that direction. So go ahead and lead us off with this one.
Well, yeah, I mean, so for me, this term essential workers, I believe we're all essential, if you want to leave it at the baseline. But, I think related to this pandemic, I try to look at it through the lens of a political scientist where, I'm studying policy and I'm, getting into a little, law related to how, particularly this country is going about handling the pandemic. And like you said, it has been politicized. And so, we've mentioned already that, living in a capitalist, society, unfortunately, when these challenges come, they're going to be, different interests that's trying to capitalize, for lack of a better word, off of, what's happening. So, in terms of what has been, what has gotten right in terms of essential workers is still kind of hard to, recognize, for me from a policy perspective, and unfortunately, the public health, sector is bearing the brunt of it. And we know from our experience dealing with, policies related to insurance and who gets medical care. And again, going back to the roots of systemic racism, we know that, marginalized groups and minority communities are always going to bear the brunt of a pandemic such as this. And so what has happened, in my belief, is that, all of these things that's contributed to, what we see in terms of the pressure from certain sectors of society and how, race is an issue, how the media is dealing with, race, and the pandemic. The media is, in my opinion, a big part of, agitating, these different factions of society. And so that's how I try to view it. Again, viewing it as a systemic problem, and, we can go into history, but, this is nothing new within the context of American history.
Right, and then that's something that we, for whatever reasons, like was said earlier, only some people are starting to recognize it for the first time ever, whether they voluntarily chose to ignore or it's something that is now like they were forced to pay attention, right? Because we don't have the distractions, and all you get to do is like really see where you at. So Brother Aaron, you kept alluding to this particular question. So floor is now yours for this one.
Yeah, a nice way of saying I talked about it too early too.
No, you're good. Everything is interrelated, so I'm all here for it, brother. You're fine.
I mean, this really, again, addresses the necessity of having nationalized health care. We have a system where we don't want to pay people a lot when they're in these positions of someone handling our food, and we want to pay them minimum wage and not care if they have health insurance. So, but even if you get into professional jobs, we still have this mentality in this country, unfortunately, that's been driven into people that you still go to work sick. You still got to show up, show them that you're going to work through anything, which is the stupidest thing we can do, because it's been proven that when a sick person shows up to work, they get everybody else sick. It's the same thing we've seen with COVID. It was states that opened up too early or never closed. Like, Florida or Texas or Arizona, you are just you're opening up to everyone else. And what we see from that is it's such a selfish way to look at it as well, because it's not through everyone's, their own fault all the time, because they're having to worry about their job. Are they still going to have a job? But we look at societies that have been upheld in this country as far as being hard workers, such as like Japan and the hard worker. Yet you look at Japanese federal law, and they have up to, I believe it's like 20 paid days mandated by federal law for every worker. You know how many we have in this country by federal law? 0. You don't have to give a worker any kind of paid time off whatsoever in jobs. You get 2 weeks off, it's like they're giving you the world. Oh, we gave you 2 weeks off. You should be happy. And one of the interesting things that this has done too is I've seen this in not just what we look as essential workers with hourly workers. I've had this discussion with a lot of friends. It's also created situations where a lot of us who are working remotely, it's almost like, well, you're working from home. Where else are you going to go? Here's an email at 10:30. We need you to hop on this. That's 10:30 p.m. Here's something at midnight. We need you to work on it. Hop on it. It's started to blur these lines now as far as when you even have your work hours. Is it really just whenever you wake up to whenever you go to bed? So this opens up so many issues when it comes to workers' rights and things that we really have fought in the past. But what we've seen with this administration and just capitalism in general, the eroding of workers' rights, that's been ongoing. I was reading something interesting today when they're talking about, they try to label Chinese companies that as if they're the ones that were taking the workers from this country and opening the factories, to take all the blame off of the people who actually own the companies who are moving the workers and the factories over in the first place so they can save some more money. So it's really how we frame these narratives. And unfortunately, what we've seen from a lot of it is it's we frame it, and the person who's in power, who has the money, are the ones who are framing these narratives. And it's also where we are placing our priorities. We should want everybody in this country to be healthy and to have access to health care. That shouldn't even be a question. That's essential. And if someone's handling our food, we should want them to be healthy and have access to health care, and not show up and sneeze on your food or be sick and and show up because they have to worry about paying the rent. And that's just another issue we're going to start to see now too, when we have all these things that have these freezes we've seen in different cities as far as evictions. Just wait for the next couple of months. We're going to start to see some more ugliness once people start getting evicted. If they don't renew what they've been doing federally as far as the extra $600 for unemployment, if there's no more stimulus, we're going to start to see a whole new world as far as what's going to happen. And a lot of people are hurting because of what still plenty of people being out of jobs. So what's essential is this, there's so many different levels of it. It's not just saying, someone who's working in the field, someone who's working in a meat packing. There's so many different levels. Like Khalil said, we all are essential workers in some sense. And doing what Trump did with the new executive order, saying, we're not gonna have any H-1B visas. We're not gonna have these skilled workers now to be able to come in, because you're trying to scapegoat to make it look like the immigrants are the ones who are taking these jobs. Yet again, it's people like himself and his friends who are the ones who are deciding where they're taking those jobs and who is getting those jobs. So again, like we've all been saying, it's a multi-tiered discussion that could go on for a long time. So
what's really telling about this is, again, like in each of your responses, you are still hitting at the main factor that there's all these things that have never ever been really resolved, and in so many cases have gotten even worse. And I think that in and of itself kind of brings up question number 4, where we really are looking at within the past month. Today, of course, marks the 1 month anniversary of George Floyd's murder. And we have been seeing consecutive weeks since then of protests and the like, and really underscoring, of course, in the face of someone's life could be taken by COVID-19 for the lack of response from our federal government in some places around the country, state and local governments. But with this question 4, we don't know exactly where or how long this is going to go. There's a lot of things that's changing in Washington and in certain police departments and school districts and the like. But where is really going to be sustainable? So with question 4, before the uprising, referring to this movement where people of all stripes, all backgrounds are coming together and realizing that something needs to change. Again, COVID-19 revealed these well-known disparities and institutional and systemic racism within our communities throughout the US. Can the uprising be an answer for how we see how our differences tear us apart? Or is it really going to be a movement to really make sure that we could dismantle racism and injustice? I'm going to shoot to Khalil first on this one.
Yeah, so this is a very, very important theoretically based question, deep, but I'm gonna actually hope we can take this as a common, question to reflect on throughout the entire series, inshallah. And for this one, I would say yes and no in terms of, the uprising being a natural reaction to, again, years of systemic racism and injustice towards, African Americans. The horrible death of George Floyd was obviously nothing new, especially related to, our, the way we go about, presenting, these types of murders, throughout the media. So this was inevitable, and the reaction to it, obviously, there's some similarities and differences to, this current uprising and the reaction to, things that have happened in the past. So I would say yes in that regard. But it seems the more I study, the movement, and I study certain elements related to the reaction, unfortunately, I am, skeptical in terms of it, having an independent impact for, overall systemic change, because there are so many elements, involved that are not organic towards the feelings and sentiments of African Americans, and particularly, related to this incident and, what has happened. So if, I could be more clear on the issue, if you want to take, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement, there's some questionable elements there, and that's within, because I know brothers and sisters within, that movement. But like any other movement, and throughout the history of the U.S. and, movements around the world, when you live, especially in a capitalist society, first and foremost, you got to be aware, because the issue has become, monetized, for example, the media and certain parties with certain agendas. So it's taken, that experience away from the movement and put in another place and capitalize off of slavery, throughout the history of the United States, unfortunately has been taken, away from Blacks in this country. And, even in my profession, studied for the benefit of, monetary or, material gain. It's just a thing to look at. So, I would say, passing on to the rest of the panel, that, this particular, instance was George Floyd. And we see the result of, some of the reactions and actions following up to that, because there have been many other, murders by cops of both men and women, in the African American community. We see that, unfortunately, like many other movements in the past, that, it's been taken away and used for, another agenda, whether it be political, social, economic. I've been thinking deeply today, particularly about the media's responsibility in all of this. And, unfortunately, I think especially as Muslims, again, with the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we can see through some of these, inconsistencies and, present Islam as a just solution to, a lot of these issues.
Sister Saima.
Yes, so it's a very important question, and I have a lot of hope, but I have the same answer, that yes and no. No, if we are just taking it as a reaction, like we are getting so impulsive and so reactionary that we see one incident and we just react and forget about it. And then we see another incident and we just, go, all of us go in this other direction, like we did with Kashmir, there are so many issues we can, count on our fingers right now. So if we are in a reactionary mode, it's not gonna, nothing can be achieved. But yes, it is an amazing uprising. And if we really think about it, it can lead to so many positivities. It can lead to something really positive. But we really need to think, we really need to reflect and act. So reflection is very, very important. And I think this series is, crucial for this, that we should every month, the community leaders should think, our youth should think and join this movement. We need leaders like you, mashallah. I'm so proud of all of you. Jazakallah khairan kaseera. But alhamdulillah, leaders like you who can continue to inspire. We need inspirational leaders. If we can focus on our youth right now, then and I'm seeing and you can imagine in Glen Allen, there is a Palestinian sister, girl, high schooler. She was leading the marches here. It was like mind-boggling for Black Lives Matter. So, subhanAllah, our youth has so much potential if we can focus on the youth. And I want to talk to the youth that you have so much, you have so much energy. You have so much, talent, mashallah. But you have to give it in the right direction, reflect, learn, and act. We have to. And another thing is that all of us need to read the life of our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how he did it. We have an example, amazing example. He's our role model, how he did it. So really, this is the time to think, pause, and reflect and act. It's not just only thinking. Like we spend so much long years of thinking. This is the time to act. Every one of us has responsibility. We can do something. We can do something. We know actually what we have to do from our own homes, from our own lives. The racism in our community is we all know how, it is affecting all of us. From our, like we were discussing yesterday, it was so cool. Like someone mentioned that, when we want to marry our son or daughter, we don't want to go outside in another family. So this is, if we are joining the marches, if we are going in the rallies, we have to reflect that am I really removing, racism from my own heart and my mind and doing something. This is what Quran teaches us. وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. We have to stand firm for the justice. No matter if it is against me, against my family, we have to stand firm and join hands and do something. But this is a golden movement, really, inshallah.
MashaAllah. Thank you for that, Dr. Saima. I'm going to add to this for you, Brother Aaron, a wonderful reminder on how movements sometimes, and I think to Khalil's point, things can go awry in terms of the organic intentions that's pure when there's the threat of monetizing or make sure I use this sister's words right, pandering, pimping from corporations or even anyone that's powerful or influential in making things happen. So Can you reflect on that? Because I think in some ways from your earlier responses as well, we were talking about those who do not have guaranteed rights. When we talk about the workers, we talk about the undocumented, we're talking about those who feel the threat of, keeping food on the table and other things just to survive. What does that mean when they are confronted by, staying alive by not facing police, or staying alive by avoiding an unknown sickness that we're still waiting for a vaccine on?
And we got to have a whole other month for discussion just on this topic alone, because
Inshallah, we will.
If we're gonna get it, this is, you've got so many different adages that people know. Clean up your own backyard is the one that comes to my mind. I've been in the Muslim community for 15.5 years. I remember one of the earliest things that I was with Brother Alberto, who used to work at Yemen, and we were working at trying to work with day laborers about 15 years ago, and working with day laborers, trying to get them a lot of their rights, and a lot of times just getting money, a lot of times from Muslims who they had employed them. And he made a great point all those years ago when we were talking about a lot of these butcher shops that were throughout the city there, Muslim butcher shops. He's like, people are so concerned with getting zabih meat and having it be halal, talking about zabih halal, but they're employing undocumented workers who they're paying below minimum wage and treating like garbage. So what in that exactly is halal about how that just because you invoke the name of Allah when you slaughter the animal, that doesn't forgo everything that happened before that? How are the workers even treated? And then, Brother Khalil, mentions that the fact when we talk about, or the sister did, about the marriage. Yeah, how many people if someone from one of these communities, if a brown or Black brother or sister went to a family and asked for the hand in marriage of a child from one of these families who might be out there in these protests, but still turn around and then be like, well, no, not in my family. We have so many different things we really have to explore here, because we have to internally look at what's happening within our own community and how we're addressing those issues. We can't have people in the community turning and talking about how those people are so racist. Look at what they're doing to everyone, when they need to be turning that finger back at themselves or their mom or their dad or their uncle or their cousin or whoever else it might be. And Sister Yesha, mentioned something that I've been telling people too for a long time, during this time, is like, when people are getting rid of Aunt Jemima like that, they're not doing it because they think we want to, and I agree with the pander, but they're not doing it right away because they think they're pandering. They're doing it because they knew it was racist. They've known it was racist. When they're getting rid of the Confederate flag so quickly, NASCAR's like, we're getting rid of the Confederate flag. So you damn well knew it was a sign of racism. It's so easy for people to then say, yeah, we'll get rid of it. Well, why? Because you already knew. You weren't woke. You didn't get awakened right now just because someone told you. You knew when you just ignored the fact that you knew that was racist, and these were signs of racism. So people within the Muslim community themselves know about this racism. They see it. We have to address it and not have this pushback that happens on people who do that work, who try to bring to light these issues. Say, no, you're going to make us look bad. You're going to make us look bad in the bigger community. We're still finding ourselves here. No, Muslim community's been here for 50 plus years. You can't start using that word new immigrants. We're not new immigrants. A lot of us aren't even new immigrants. A lot of us got roots here, like myself. I got indigenous roots that bring me back to being one of the original people in this land. So not all of us are new here, and the community's not new. So you can't get by with that. Well, we're new. We're trying to establish ourselves. People know. So this has to be an awakening, not just to what's happening and how some groups are treating other groups. It also has to be, how are we treating a lot of these groups within our communities? Because if we're not addressing that, then it is just pandering. You don't care about what's really happening because you're not really trying to change yourself and your own community first and foremost, which is the most important thing to do. And then again, I could go on for a while, and I'm going to stop.
So much for time constraints. So subhanAllah. And again, each of you, alhamdulillah, we've been able to have discussions before, but I think it's now time to actually start to wrap up this panel discussion. And you've already each of you been suggesting ways to start being proactive and take action that will hopefully keep us grounded and not just being reactionary, as Dr. Slimer said. So going to question 5, and again, seeing across purposes of both the COVID-19 and the racism as pandemics that are active and live, how can we leverage our shared experience for both? And I'm leaving it as open-ended interpretation because we recognize that each one of us are coming from different walks of life, right? You're able, Brother Aaron, just to express like your days go back to possibly prior to the founding of the country, and I can also, speak to that. Earliest ancestors were someone that was captured, enslaved here in the 18th century, and as well as others who came here that has skin that enslaved my people, right? Which also happen to be in my blood. So there's these known experiences that did not just occur overnight, but it has definitely been ingrained in the DNA of what's now called this experiment of the United States of America. So how can we leverage the shared experiences from both these pandemics, especially when we're seeing like there's this intersectionality of the communities facing injustices and inequity? So particularly in relationship to this, right, the examples are excessive policing in terms of racism, and then inadequate healthcare in terms of COVID-19. And this is very also poignant too, because each of our communities, whether we're identified solely as Muslim or within the other parts of our identities, right? So Dr. Salema, Muslim sister, South Asian descent that wears the hijab, Brother Arun, who's Latino, and also work with undocumented brothers and sisters in many different facets. And then Khalil and I, both African-American, and given our particular past. So curious, let's start with Dr. Salema on this one. Because you've definitely been speaking to that spirit of how we harness and build towards a positive reactions to challenges.
Yes, I believe, and this is my iman or faith, you can say, that we have to build on the positives. If we keep looking at that, although it's very important, if there is a darkness, there is a darkness. But we have to find that smallest ray of light and move towards that. And then maybe we can, go in the bright daylight. So my experience with both, what I was reflecting and I was thinking that one thing is that these challenges are massive, huge challenges. These are very difficult. We have very, very difficult situations. I belong to a very pampered family. I'm very my husband cooked for me. So it's a very pampered environment. But as soon as I start working with ICNA relief, and I learned that, my neighbors don't have food. There are issues in my own backyard. How can I sleep peacefully? I learned that, there is racism all around us. This is a sad reality. But the more we join hands, the more we discuss, the more we work together. Through this pandemic, I learned that the more we talk to each other, the more we work together, we can go somewhere. And then, so with ICNA Relief, we are planning and we are moving in that direction. We have right now 80 partner organizations, including, mosques and churches and masajid and synagogues and hospitals and local community organizations and local nonprofits. So alhamdulillah, we are building amazing partnerships. And I think that we are starting that movement of compassion and mercy, that we have to change. This is how we can sleep peacefully at night. So the experience was brutal, and I can again write a book on that. But there is a hope, and we have to talk to each other. We have to reach out. We have to talk to each other, and we have to find solutions. And right now we are doing this. Alhamdulillah, with CARE, Civic Coalition, with respectful guests, alhamdulillah, we are doing that.
Inshallah, we're gonna hopefully uplift you so you can write that book.
For healthcare, actually, I want to add for healthcare that we have a mobile clinic in ICNA Relief. We have a network of healthcare health facilities in the United States, and as we are going in direction of starting a proper telehealth clinic, because in this situation it's it's very hard for our communities. Even we receive many calls for the patients who are unable to find the their diabetes medications. It's just like very crucial kind of medicines. It was hard for them to find the prescription, and we are moving in that direction. Inshallah, soon you'll hear some good news about that.
Inshallah, that particular last part, my mother was also impacted by that with some of the places that were looted. My sister had to drive around for more than a half hour miles outside their residence to make sure my mom could find her medication fulfilled. So inshallah, that would be really noble. So yes, inshallah, we'll hold you to write the book, inshallah. That's not a far-fetched idea. Allah guide you in that effort, inshallah. All right, let's go with Brother Aaron.
I think one of the biggest things is people need to step out of their comfort zones. Racism is learned. It's based off of then fear of the other, not knowing other people. If you're a Muslim, you live in the suburbs, come to Masjid al-Faruq for a Jummah. Get to know some people. Go to Iman for a Jummah. I'd never feel more comfortable anywhere else than on the south side if I'm at a masjid there than anywhere else. I feel more welcome than anywhere else I've ever been. And we need to step out of that comfort zone to know other people, to get to know other people, to get to know other Muslims first and foremost. Then we can work on going outside of the community. But first and foremost, just get to know other Muslims. Go to other communities and volunteer and just go. Don't just show up at Iman for the community iftar one night a year and feel like, oh, I did my thing. I went one time. Show up on days where there's nobody else there. That's like when I used to do legislative work in Springfield. When I would show up on a Tuesday, I knew who was really dedicated to the work, because on a Monday or Tuesday, when the legislators are first getting there, it's empty. Go to some of these community events and some of these community centers and some of these masjids when no one else is there. And one of the things that we need to do too that I've seen too much of is that we need to be doing things just because we want to be doing them to help people. Not doing it and then putting on blast. Look what I just did with all this food I donated. I've seen it too much in some of these communities, that people who have made money off of having businesses there, whether it be a corner store, whether there be an attorney who is getting clients from these neighborhoods. If you're doing good there, Islamically, we know you're not supposed to be putting your own self on blast. You're not supposed to be hyping yourself up on your Facebook page or anywhere else, showing what you just did. You should be doing that. You should already be dedicated to doing that, just because that's our what we've been taught. That's our example as Muslims. So there are lots of shining examples that we can follow, and lots of great glimmers that we can see of what people are doing. So we follow those examples, and again, we just need to get to know one each other better. Because these experiences that a lot of people in our community that have been going through and been suffering from this pain has not just been happening for the last couple of years. It's been happening for generations. And we need to hear from people, to hear their stories, so we can understand and hear other people's lived experiences.
Yeah, again, I can see, hopefully, inshallah, that we can go deeper in these particular issues throughout the series, inshallah. You probably also too need to write a book, Haki, inshallah. So hold you to that as well. Brother Khalil.
Sorry about that. I basically shared the same sentiments as Dr. Simon and Brother Harun related to, what's needed now, getting out of our bubble and having a dialogue. We need to learn to listen to each other, obviously. And I mean, I would just add that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as Muslims, we understand that He created the conditions for us, to come together. You know, a lot of times, you know, he creates the conditions for society to move in a certain way. And this is one of those issues, you know, whether or not, you know, you believe or see, you know, it as a man-made, you know, thing and something that's a punishment. Like Dr. Simon, I like to see, you know, the positive side of things and coming together and listening to each other, you know, in the communities that we're in, because we're in a very rich environment in terms of Islam and Muslims and their perspectives. To, you know, kind of get directly at your question, I'll keep it, you know, simple, you know, but, you know, creating that leverage to, you know, some of the commonly held beliefs and, you know, some of the misconceptions, you know, that exists by the white dominant hegemony as opposed to, you know, our minority communities, you know, within the context of our society is important. You guys are supporting and bringing up the census a lot. And I will say that actually a part of my study is dealing with, you know, urban politics and urban development. And we see that, you know, I think with this census, it'll be the first time in the United States where there are more people living in urban environments and within the cities as opposed to rural areas. So obviously when people come together in the way that we do, and we know that a lot of minority communities, you know, occupy, you know, urban areas. But, you know, especially with a city like Chicago, we see a lot of gentrification, a lot of policies being put forth to continually marginalize minority communities, as well as, you know, with what your question is stating, excessive policing, healthcare or lack thereof. But, you know, creating this dialogue is important and understanding, you know, our capability to leverage, you know, what's happening is also important. I'll just leave it at that.
Inshallah. Just to continue that trope, you too, inshallah, now that you're becoming an academician, looking forward to seeing your works and seeing how they could be applied, inshallah, in the real world beyond academia. So Allahu Alam on that one, man. Final question, and this kind of ties it and circles back to a sort of essence of not only the theme for this webinar, but why we have this series in the first place. Just really curious on how we're going to make the most of moving forward with everything still feeling abnormal, unprecedented in some cases, but also like drastic seismic changes that's constantly we're having to adapt to, whether it's progressive or regressive in some cases, right? They're alluding to certain states having to close again because they're seeing spikes after having premature openings, or looking at specific policies that has not been really thoroughly addressed in the past, and also seeing what the prospects would be if we have a certain turnout, whether the current president is reelected or there's someone else. Does that mean that we continue with the old, and what previously normal will it be redefined or stay the same moving forward? So question 6, please. So in that sense, how are you individually? And I want to make sure, like, because we are also in our own ways adapting, as well as in the roles that we play. How are we adapting to both the pandemics, and how are you defining and moving towards a new normal, whatever that it means for you? Especially too, noting that tomorrow, Illinois, for those who are viewing us if they happen to be out of state, Illinois is shifting into space 4 of 5, which means like just about anything could open with safe distancing and safe social distancing, up to 50 people in certain gatherings. But what does that still mean if a lot of these inequities and disparities that we've noted persist and still no clear end in sight for these things? Let's start off again with Brother Khalil, and then work towards Brother Aaron, and then Sister Dr. Simon could close us out.
Yeah, so obviously, you know, this is still a very dynamic and fluid situation moving towards the new normal. Me personally, again, I continue to educate myself with rich and viable resources and media outlets related to this pandemic and the uprising for that matter. But I think another issue that I would like to highlight, related to this question is the need, to gravitate towards, what our science and data, is saying. And I'm not just saying that as an academic, but I've had discussions with, for example, European officials related to how they handle, the pandemic in different states of Europe, and what some of the trends are globally. I think one of the worst things that we can do, because this is a global pandemic, and I'm kind of sensing, especially with the Trump administration, a little arrogance related to, how the U.S. is standing with it as opposed to other parts of the world, which is very, in my opinion, very, very dangerous. This is a global pandemic affecting the whole world. And, as a Muslim, looking at it through my Islamic filter, one of those things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is testing us with, and the more, arrogant, we become, the more, damaging some of the consequences can be, just evaluating, Islam and the Quran and our history. But yeah, moving towards a new normal is, one of those things that I'm still trying to figure out, to be honest with you. I'm not going to sit here and say, I have the answer to that. And like you say, Illinois is shifting tomorrow from, phase 3 to 4. But me personally, I might, fall back a little bit. I'm not going to get too excited because, I play chess, and in chess, I know the pawns go first, not to belittle anybody else who are in situations where they have to, compromise some things. I mean, we all as a minority community and going to be in certain situations. I'm just personally going to try to limit it for the safety of myself and family members. I did have, I do know people who've been, heavily affected, by this virus and still, heavily affected by the pandemic. And so, me personally, I just, want to try to continue to educate myself and be involved in platforms such as this. So, inshallah, I'll leave it at that.
And before I have Dr. Slema comes on, I didn't realize we're at 7:29, so apologies for the extension. We hope that you can stay on, but if not, we totally understand. We still want to address a couple of things as we end with this final question. But Dr. Slema.
It's a very good question, Brother Jihad. MashaAllah. So on organization wise, at a personal level, I don't know if I should say that or not, but I kind of like it. Like, you are spending more time with your family. So it is a new norm. We can live in the minimum. It's a new learning phase that we can do so much without going out, without spending time, spending time on in shopping malls or weird looking at the sales and other things. So it's kind of a good learning curve for me, that your family is important. You can cook food at home, you can spend time with family, and this is good. This is a blessing. That's one thing. But in terms of my organization, we learned that now our community members are going through very, very tough time. It's a very tough time. Many family members have lost their jobs and they are suffering. Courts now, they can be evicted, easily, because there was some pause for 2 to 3 months. Now if they are not paying rent, there will be a lot of evictions, and they need rent, and we are receiving hundreds and hundreds of requests for this rent, and we don't know from where we're gonna give. So what we are planning, that we will be reaching out to our community members one by one. We'll be making well-being calls as we were doing. We are going to expand that work. We are not going to give up in this situation. giving up is not an option. So, and second thing is we never depended on the government grants or funds. So we always, alhamdulillah, a community, Muslim community and people of other faith has been supporting ICNA Relief. Giving up is not an option. We are not depending on the funds. And we are basically, we need volunteers. So right now we have almost 300 beautiful, amazing volunteers who are helping us out on daily basis with different things. You say, loading or unloading the truck or making phone calls or doing the case assessment, case management, connecting these families with the right resources. We do the training, we do mentor training, and there are many, many other things we do. So our focus is, one is recruiting more volunteers. Second is we are focusing for back to school. In August, there will be back to school. And then we are planning a very nice campaign for that. Not only supplies for students and kids, we are also doing something for the teachers, inshallah. And you will hear more details soon. We are also planning some support group for the parents because they are also, they don't have any help at home. They have to do, they have to teach at home. They have to work from home. And they have to do everything, and they have never been in that experience. I'm the national director for back to school nationally, and we did 50,000 backpacks and supplies last year, and in 415 cities nationally. So this year it will be another amazing back to school campaign. So we are planning that, inshallah. And again, same thing is that this is the movement of compassion and mercy. Anyone can call me crazy, but we have to do it, our job, so we can sleep peacefully. And we really would like to work with each other, work together, and start from your own home, see who is worried and talk to them, and then reach out to your neighbors and see how your neighbors are doing. And then, the circle will grow, inshallah. So we have many plans in the pipeline, and yeah, this new normal will be fantastic. Let's see.
Inshallah. And alhamdulillah, very much happy to hear that you guys have made strides to help community and more so still receiving and looking for others to help and share the barakah, inshallah. Thanks, Dr. Saima. But
I'll keep it brief because let's see, we're past. So really, I think it's similar to what people in the Muslim community can do. When I look at my field, look at civil rights law as well, it's very similar in the sense that when we engage communities, we have to engage them all the time, year round, not in times of crises. We don't go in a community when there's a crisis and say, hey, we want to help you. Because far too often I've seen many different nonprofits that I've been affiliated with, and not saying it's now, but I'm just saying in general, it's a common issue I've seen amongst many different groups, is that you go into the community when the crisis arrives or when it rises, and the way I've explained this to people is like, if you had a growth on your leg and it's this size, and you just think, oh, I'll get it looked at. A year later, you look and that thing's gotten to this size. You're too late. You've got to be engaged in community so that it also shows that it's a sincere desire to work in these communities and engage people in these communities. So just in general, we need to do a better job at reaching out, and whether it be through civil rights law, whether it be in the Muslim community, engaging others and talking to others and hearing from others and hearing their opinions and just hearing about what's facing them, what are the issues that they see. Because we don't ask a lot of times when you go into a community and you think you're doing good, you should be asking people in the community first and foremost, what do you need? Not going to the community thinking you know what they need, asking them, what do you need? How can we help?
Shukran. And that concludes the panel. We just have, for the game, since we went over, thanks to each and every one of you that stayed with us. So we have just two quick questions that have been submitted. So kind of, this was addressed to Brother Khalil, but if anyone else wants to chime in briefly, that is, Brother Khalil, you mentioned a few times that Islam could be a solution to systemic racism in the United States. How do you envision this, especially considering the Muslim communities so divided, and I'm sure that probably again the others want to chime in. But Khalil.
Jazakallah khair, that's a beautiful question. So I will clarify that I think that Islam is not the solution to systemic racism, but a solution for the system and for racism, because Islam has, a system, obviously, as we believe as Muslims, our aqidah is all comprehensive. It covers every aspect of life. So, simply put, we can offer this as a solution, both on the individual and collective level to those around us. In terms of racism itself, we know that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, on this last sermon, Khutbah al-Hijjah, he emphasized the unity of all people. We know the hadith that there's no favor in skin color, just in our deeds. So as Muslims, we understand this as being an integral part of our aqidah. The second part of the question related to, how can we come together as Muslims in a community? I would especially look at it from, my environment, particularly that being from, a big city, and looking at other big cities that, I've traveled to and visited frequently, Detroit, New York, etc. I think that, and I'm talking from the perspective of, obviously an African-American convert to Islam. But I think one of the blessings from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that, and I'm pretty sure that you can attest to this, was that, moving to the north side of Chicago after growing up on the south side and west side for the early part of my years, but moving to a very diverse and rich community of Muslims, getting different perspectives of, Islam and the different Muslims from all over the world, which have highly influenced me and my perspective in terms of understanding a lot of the barriers that exist in the community. Now, I'll close with saying that in a city like Chicago, which is very segregated by nature and by structure, historically and systemically, it's kind of hard to overcome some of those barriers based off of the point of view of an immigrant, in my opinion. And I'll let the other panelists speak to this, but I think going back to Islam, simply put, this is very important and very key to understanding what I just mentioned, that this is Islam, and all these issues that exist regarding racism, is null and void. Even though we acknowledge they exist, but understanding that the system has perpetrated a lot of the influences. Immigrants coming from different communities, different parts of the world, trying to get a piece of this capitalist pie, is the problem, and so I think we should address it as such, and address, as they, say, the elephant in the room.
Woo, okay. That in and of itself is a continuance. So we'll also be talking about that, brother. Again, just for the sake of time, if someone else wanted to respond, let's try to get the second question in, and this will be the final question. And again, thanks to everyone that stayed on. What should I, as an individual, do after learning about all these issues? How can I make a change in my own community? So I think each of you have addressed that in some way, shape, or fashion. So I'm also gonna try to make sure you keep it brief, but if you haven't and want to also respond to the previous question within that response, by all means, please do.
Can I say?
By all means, Dr. Simon, please.
Yes, so there are a few things which I always mention about volunteering, join hands. I want to mention another resource is ICNA Social Justice. You can also learn something from that. Civic Coalition, Care Chicago. So volunteering would be for me, volunteering would be the first step. And just observe first, and inshallah, then you will do really good.
All right. I think, Brother Aaron, he seems he's content. So we'll just close it there. Before we close, I just want to jump ahead. We do have a resource guide, but since we're going to post this live recording, you can access the resource guide to the organizations that coordinated and sponsored this event, the Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition, as well as CARE Chicago. They have additional resources, but also ICNA Relief. Dr. Saima, who works with them, as you already heard, has done a lot of phenomenal work, especially in expanded partnerships with local institutions and organizations. Be sure to check them out. However, we also want to zoom in on a lot of the organizations that are also committed to fighting anti-Blackness and racism. So I'm going to jump in first. Aforementioned Inner City Muslim Action Network, Iman, organization I've also worked with. Ron was on staff for quite a substantial period of time and a previous volunteer as well. Black Muslim COVID-19 Coalition. So this is a group of various Black masajid, Black serving community, serving masajid organizations. They're looking constantly for volunteers as well as partner organizations, either in allyship or directly in advocacy. So please check them out. Worry-Free Community and Believers Bailout has also been doing a lot of phenomenal work. So again, check out those links and be sure to follow up. But I want to be sure that we do not close out this wonderful, important event that's coming up. I'm going to introduce Sister Yasha Abraham, who is a partnership fellow with the Illinois Civic Muslim Coalition. And she'll tell you about this important Blackout Tuesday event that will be happening in 2 weeks, I guess December will be. Sister Yasha, the floor is yours.
Okay. Salam alaikum, everybody. Thank you for that introduction, Brother Gerald. My name is Yasha Abraham, and I am a partnership fellow, newly integrated into the coalition. So it's my honor and pleasure to be here with you today. The crux of what I'm going to talk about today is a movement called Blackout Tuesday. So it was made popular roughly a few weeks ago in a way that really wasn't very much in the spirit of what the day was actually about. It is not a performative blacking out of social media screens. It is an actual day of divestment of dollars. So what that means is on July 7th, which was strategically chosen because it's not going to be on a holiday where a lot of businesses are closed. It's in the middle of a week where people are really thirsty for business. And so I think a few years ago, we had a day with no Mexicans, right? Well, before that, we had still been doing blackout days where Black dollars were only spent on Black businesses. It's reported that the Black American dollar constitutes about $1.3 trillion of all consumerism practiced here in this country. So just imagine what it would be like for that money not to be filtered into the commercial economy. So that is what we propose everybody do, not just Black people, but everybody black out with us. And if you're going to spend money with Black businesses. We're very lucky to be in a city that is brimming to overflowing with Black entrepreneurship. There are tons of places that you can go to spend money on food owned by Black people, clothing made by Black people, and just about everything else that you could imagine consuming by Black people. So again, that is July 7th, the Tuesday right after 4th of July. Blackout, divest your dollars from people who profit from oppression.
Shukran, Sister Yasha. Thank you. And my apologies for mispronouncing the name. Recognize and represent or respect. Is there a source that you can direct to the participants to learn more about this important initiative?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, anything that you would want to know is going to be a Google click away. I mean, before I got on, I even saw that even BuzzFeed has an article about the origins of the blackout movement. So this year it's a Tuesday, right? But it can be another day of the week. Any day of the week, people can catch our blackout hands.
Right. Real talk. Thank you so much. And for our own, just to let it be known, it was called a day without immigrants back in 2017. And so in that spirit that Yesha just said, we can all come together. It does not have to be solely Black folk involved with that, because we all know what, especially in the light of the COVID, money is seemed like it's everything, in spite of lives being killed, lives being maimed, lives being dismissed. So by all means, appreciate you, Sister Yesha. And what's more, if you have more information, please look back to the Illinois Muslim Civic Coalition's page, both on Facebook and YouTube. You will get to, again, hear Sister Yesha, as well as the rest of the panel discussion, as well as you can go to CARE Chicago's YouTube and Facebook pages as well. We'll be coming soon to announce the second webinar. By all means, if you enjoyed it, found it very informative, by all means, let your peoples know to come check us out. And again, in the spirit of all that is worth being in solidarity, whether in the traditions of the Deen al-Islam or just in whatever togetherness that Allah and God or the higher power brings forth, please go with God and be safe and be loved and be in good works, sustainable works, inshallah. With that, thank you so much. Do have a good night. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for participating.